Hi everyone, my name is Ray Flowers, and welcome to my channel. This will be my first video short. I want to talk about the death, burial, and resurrection of our Messiah. I'll begin reading in Matthew 16, verses 1 through 4. Then the Pharisees and Sadducees came, and testing him asked that he would show them a sign from heaven. He answered and said to them, When it is evening, you say, It will be fair weather, for the sky is red, and in the morning it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites! You know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the sign of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left them and departed. What did he mean by the sign of the prophet Jonah? Let's dig into this. The sign of the prophet Jonah. Jonah chapter 1, verse 17. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Matthew 12, verse 38 through 40. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered, saying, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. But he answered and said to them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. In this verse, we see clearly now that Yeshua was referring to the 3 days and 3 nights of Jonah being in the belly of the great fish. He would be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. To bring clarification to the 3 days and 3 nights that Messiah said that he'd be in the heart of the earth, we need to understand, when does a biblical day start? It's been commonly taught by our Jewish brethren that the day begins in the evening, as they keep their Sabbath from sunset Friday to sunset Saturday. But is this really the case? Let's go back and read this for ourselves. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And then God said, Let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. To understand this with more clarity, we're going to break down the Hebrew words. The word here, darkness, that we first see, is the Hebrew word hoshek, which figuratively means misery, destruction, death, wickedness, and sorrow. This darkness is here before God's Spirit is hovering over the face of the waters. Therefore, it cannot be part of the day. We don't know how long it's been there. When God shows up, it's already there. This is not part of the day. The day begins when he says, Let there be light, and he divides the light from that darkness. That darkness is not part of the day, as the light was divided from it. The day clearly begins when God says, Let there be light. And we're going to see this as we progress. God begins to name the parts of the day. The light he calls day, yom in Hebrew, and then he names the darkness night, leil in Hebrew. But there's something interesting going on. When we read, God called the light day and the darkness he called night, so the evening and the morning were the first day. Continuing on in the verses in Genesis verses 1 through 5, we see the Hebrew word for evening is erev, which means sunset, eventide, mingled. This is the point where the day is turning into night. You cannot have a mixture of light and darkness if this darkness is the beginning of the day, because we start in darkness. Where would your transition period be from that darkness to the light? You don't have a marker setting apart the day from that darkness until God says, Let there be light. Now we see a separation from that darkness, which is a different Hebrew word. The word is hoshek, and that word literally meant death, destruction. The word for the nighttime is leil. It's a completely different word from the darkness that's in the beginning. Therefore, we see that the day begins when God says, Let there be light. In this slide, we see a clearer picture of when a day does begin. We cannot count that darkness as part of the day, as it is there before God's Spirit is hovering over the face of the waters. We do not see a transition period between this light and that darkness, like we do when God begins to name the parts of the day. When God says, "Let there be light," time begins, and then we see a transition period of the light to the darkness with this evening. And then we also see the same transition period when the night begins to turn into the next day. There's transition periods which God clearly names evening and morning. The pattern continues with God. The pattern of creation continues when you see that God is creating during the day, and then there's evening, and then there's morning. In John chapter 9, verse 4, Yeshua says, "I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work." This is a shadow picture of a Messiah telling us that he works just as his Father worked. His Father worked during the day, and then there was evening, and then there was morning. While I can go clearly more into depth on this, this is not a teaching exclusively about when the day begins. This is only to whet your appetite and begin to study things more clearly for yourself. This study is about the 3 days and 3 nights of our Messiah being in the tomb. The death of Messiah. John chapter 19, verse 30. So when Yahushua had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. 1931. Therefore, because it was the preparation day, that the bodies should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day. This is not the weekly Sabbath. It is a high holy day. It is the feast of unleavened bread. Leviticus 23, verses 6 through 7. And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. And on the first day you shall have a holy convocation, that word's important, and you shall do no customary work on it. We can see when you go back in Leviticus and read about the Sabbath, on the Sabbath day you were to have a holy convocation and do no customary work on it. This day is treated like a Sabbath. John is giving you a big clue when he says that it is a high day. He's not talking about the weekly Sabbath, he's talking about the high holy day, the feast of unleavened bread. The burial of Messiah. We're going to compare 2 gospel accounts of the burial of Messiah to get a clearer picture of what was going on. We'll start in John chapter 19, verses 38 through 42. After this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate gave him permission. So he came and took the body of Jesus, and Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus at night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. Then they took the body of Jesus and bound it in strips of linen with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. Notice that Nicodemus bring a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. That's a lot of spices. Now we'll read in Luke chapter 23, verses 50 through 54. Now behold, there was a man named Joseph, a council member, a good and just man. He had not consented to their decision. Indeed, he was from Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who himself was also waiting for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus, or Yeshua, and then they took it down, wrapped it in linen, and laid it in the tomb that was hewn out of a rock, where no one had laid before. That day was the preparation day, and Sabbath drew near. At the end of Luke's Gospel, in chapter 23, verse 53, we have an interesting Greek word for drew near. That word is epiphosko, which means beginning to dawn or to grow light. When comparison between John's Gospel and Luke's Gospel, we can see that it took Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus all night during the Passover to prepare the body of Messiah. Remember, Nicodemus brought 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes to prepare the body. This is their Messiah. They would have taken careful consideration when preparing his body. It would have taken them all night long to clean the body of Yeshua after all the wounds that were inflicted upon him. And then they laid him in the tomb during the night of the Passover, and they lay him in the tomb right before the dawning of the next day. That next day is going to be the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The 3 days and 3 nights that Messiah said he'd be in the heart of the earth. Now that we have a clear picture of when he was placed into the ground, we know that it was after Passover, the day after the Passover, because the day was beginning to dawn or grow light. In John's account, we get this, John chapter 20, verse 1. Now the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Knowing that the first day of the week is Sunday, we know this day is after the weekly Sabbath. The stone had been rolled away and Messiah is gone. We can now begin to count backwards to see the fulfillment of the Jonah prophecy that Messiah gave to the Pharisees to prove he is the long-awaited Messiah. Further clarification of the 3 days and 3 nights that Yeshua would have been in the heart of the earth. Mary is at the tomb early Sunday morning and it is still dark, meaning our Messiah would have been resurrected during the night of the Sabbath. Counting backwards shows us that Passover occurred Wednesday of that year. Thursday would have been the high holy day that the Gospel of John tells us about. This is the first day of unleavened bread, which is treated as a Sabbath. As we read in Leviticus, you would have a holy convocation on this day and do no customary work. It was treated just as the weekly Sabbath. In fact, when you're reading in Leviticus, the description for the Sabbath is the exact same. Our Messiah was fulfilling the prophecy of Jonah, being in the heart of the earth for 3 literal days and 3 literal nights, thus proving he is the Messiah. Mary is clearly at the tomb here, right before the Sabbath, right before the dawning of Sunday. John's Gospel tells us that it is the first day of the week. That is the first day after the Sabbath, as Sabbath is the 7th day. So now we can begin to count backwards. We have Sabbath night, or Saturday night, Sabbath day, or Saturday, Friday night, Friday, Thursday night, Thursday. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus place Yeshua in the tomb right here as they prepared the body all night of the Passover, placing him in the tomb right before the dawning of the first day of unleavened bread. We clearly see that our Messiah was in the heart of the earth 3 literal days and 3 literal nights. I've heard it taught that our Jewish brethren teach that even if you're on a portion of the day, you can count that as a full day. Christianity has always taught us that Yeshua is fulfilling the 3 days and 3 nights. But we can clearly see that Messiah was very specific. He did not say just 3 days. If he said that, I might see your argument that he could have been in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. Christianity teaches that Yeshua died on Friday and was resurrected on Sunday, and that would give you 3 days, but it doesn't give you 3 days and 3 nights. And your argument falls flat when you realize that Mary is at the tomb before the dawning of the first day of the week. It's clearly still dark, and the stone has already been rolled away, meaning our Messiah would have been resurrected at some point during the night. If that is the case and he died on Friday, you would only have 2 days, as he's already resurrected before the dawning of Sunday. I hope this teaching has blessed you. I would like to continue some video shorts clarifying some of the scriptures that are often misunderstood. If you like this video and were blessed by it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, as I'm hoping to be releasing more videos in the future. Thank you so much for your time, and may your day be blessed.